Thank you, Michael, and I want to add my thanks to everybody. We were here a week ago at the same time, and we spent a lot of time introducing ourselves to one another. We're going to spend less time doing that this week and getting more into the matter at hand, the status of the bridge and how we're going to deal with the closure short and long term of the bridge. But there are five members who were not able to either be with us last week or because of a technical issue, not able to introduce themselves. So we're going to ask Mark. Mark, how do you pronounce your last name?
The last name is pronounced H, just like the letter.
H. Okay, Mark. Well, introduce yourself to the group and what part of this you represent.
I'm just a community member, and my name is Mark H. I am a physician assistant certified, previously medical director of homeless services for Neighbor Care. So I worked at the 45th Homeless Youth Clinic and was the medical director there. Established the Ballard Homeless Clinic and also the 3rd Avenue Homeless Clinic. I moved to West Seattle in 1997. I've owned 3 homes here. My wife also lives here with me in West Seattle, of course, and she works at the Pioneer Square Clinic, which is also a homeless clinic. So I have a real vested interest in the traffic here in West Seattle. And I guess that's it.
Yeah, thank you and welcome. Katie Garrow. Katie, are you with us today? I took a quick look at the participant list. I didn't see Katie, so she may not be with us yet. Peter Goldman. Peter, are you...
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I think I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, and hello, everybody. I'm Peter Goldman, and I'm a public interest environmental lawyer specializing in forest law. I've lived in West Seattle near Alki Beach for 32 years. I'm on the board of the Washington Environmental Council, and I've also worked closely with Cascade Bike Club on promoting bike and e-bike infrastructure in the city. I asked to join the task force because I understand West Seattle transportation issues very well, and I'm eager to work with all of you to craft short and long-term solutions to the loss of the High Bridge. I've bike commuted to Pioneer Square for over 25 years, and like many of you, I've done my share of busing and driving across the bridges. I'm also familiar with SDOT because I was representing the International Longshore and Warehouse Union Local 19, which opposed the siting of the arena in SDOT, and I became very familiar with the transportation issues in that area. I'm here because I think the citizens are really counting on us. The loss of the High Bridge and COVID-19 pandemic require us to really rethink how we can safely and efficiently move people and freight around in the long and short term. In my view, no sustainable, climate-realistic, and equitable transportation system can rely wholly on single-passenger vehicles. So I view this task force as uniquely poised to develop some innovative ideas to link West Seattle to downtown transportation solutions that go beyond single-passenger cars. Long-term, I'm excited about a bridge or a tunnel that incorporates both cars and light rail. But I'm particularly excited to work with you and SDOT staff on developing an effective and equitable interim transportation plan, one that respects our industrial and maritime industries, but which also gets West Seattle residents downtown and back, and others to West Seattle via much more robust use of water taxis, biking, and e-biking. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome. Charlene Robbins. Again, I was scanning and I didn't necessarily see Charlene. If you're here, Charlene, please introduce yourself. Otherwise, we will get you when you come online. Okay. And finally, a person who spent most of last meeting trying to find his voice, Port Commissioner Peter Steinbruck. Peter? Oh no.
There we go. I forgot to unmute.
Okay.
I was trying to behave. Thank you, Mayor Nichols. It's great to be here. And Peter Goldman, your sentiments are really well stated, and your perspective is going to be very valuable here. I want to thank Mayor Durkin for her leadership in establishing this community-led task force, SDOT, and we couldn't do this without you, of course, and the technical expertise that is provided there, and the co-chairs for helping shepherd this. It's quite an impressive, awe-inspiring group of folks that have been lined up for this pretty significant undertaking, I will say, to help guide this process forward. I think it's a journey. Well, it is a journey. It's a journey with unknown turns right now. But I want to say I am an architect, community planner professionally, and I am president of the Port of Seattle, which encompasses all of King County, as Mayor Nichols noted last time. I am also co-chair of the Great Northwest Seaport, along with my co-chair John McCarthy and allies at the Port of Tacoma, who are very much engaged in this issue as well. So we're a point there is that this extends well beyond Seattle. I recognize that the existing high bridge is a critical link between West Seattle, a city unto itself in some regards, and the mainland. But it is also critical infrastructure to our region that is absolutely essential in terms of the transportation service that it supports. And so with it shut down now, my priorities here are number one, interim traffic management, which is an immediate necessity. We've been fortunate in some ways that we don't have full employment yet that would have that much more difficult in terms of return to work. And so, but thinking ahead right now, we're running at about 50% of the volume that we would normally occur between these four east-west connections. And that's all that those three lower bridges can stand. So we got to do some very serious traffic management and mitigation. And I appreciate that the city initially established first responders, transit, and freight as top priorities for the use of the lower bridge. The lower bridge is essential to the continued operation of Harbor Island and our gateway there to the Pacific and Terminal 5. It's also critical to supporting the transportation network that allows 100,000 people to get to work at the Duwamish-Nick right next door, the state's largest manufacturing and industrial center. And finally, if something should happen to the lower bridge, we have got to do catastrophic mitigation crisis planning there. If anything should happen to the lower bridge, and we don't know. I don't want to think the worst, but we have to hope for the best and plan for the worst. Should that lower bridge be taken out of service? And with that, I'll turn it back. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to turn it over to my hardworking co-chair, Paulina Lopez, to talk a little bit about some of our working agreements and assumptions. Paulina?
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second meeting. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Again, my name is Paulina Lopez. I'm also a South Park resident, and I'm the executive director for the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition, for those of you who didn't get the chance to be here. I wanted to just go over a little bit of the meeting. That first of all, we have been working hard with I co-chaired and make sure that this is participatory as possible. And so today we are going to be embarking in a good Q&A section. We want to hear from diverse voices for each topic that we will be making the presentation. And the fact that we're having a community, a stakeholder group, this makes it really important that we get to hear from different voices. We are also going to be looking into all the impacts of the bridge closure, going through some information and specifically looking for the best thoughtful solutions acknowledging, equitable ways and how disproportion the impacts are going to be on the bridge closure, and perhaps that is a bit of my participation on this task force. So also within today, we hope to identify some challenges, get us onto how we are envisioning the best way possible to use some racial equity lens to those areas that are disproportionately impacted by the closure. And we will be having substantial conversation. As co-chairs, we want to make sure that this is a process that is working for you all. And even we recognize that 2 hours a week, it's asking a lot of you. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we won't be able to accomplish in each meeting. So we want to put an emphasis on the importance of filling out reflection forms after, because we have a large group, but we want to hear from you all. So if there are times when we cannot discuss something in here, or we didn't have the time, please make sure you fill out those reflection forms afterwards, and we will be sending links to that. Specifically referring to the agreements, we thought, we're going to be embarking into this process for a long period of time, and we're a group with multiple interests. We see the importance of coming with some agreements as a group. The way I see it versus rules is because having agreements really help us use a tool to, in the event of the right start, of keeping track, but because we can get to work respectfully together and effectively. So these are important to have, and I know that right now we see a lot of agreements reflected in there. The intention is for you to speak of what makes more sense when you belong to a group, what makes more sense to allow participation, to allow transparency, and also, because we have a mixed group of stakeholders, business, community, elected officials, and we want to create that cohesion and lead to trust on the process as representing this on a community driven, as it was described to me by Mayor Durkin when we were appointed. This is the reason why we have a committee, but it's community-led. So it's important that we find those agreements as a way that makes sense to us as a group. So we're not going to spend a bunch of time defining right now what these agreements are. But perhaps the next couple of minutes, this is going to be a work in progress. I would love to hear from you if something comes up that is important to you personally from this 36 list. There's a lot of things. And if we don't get to agree today in the next 4 or 5 minutes, I really encourage you to send what is important to you when you belong to a group and when you are part of a working group. So anyone would like to give a couple of things that will make more sense to you after you had some chance to read this? Don't be shy.
Councilmember Herbold, I think, is looking to respond.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate the opportunity to take a little bit of time with these, but just looking at the very first one, given the fact that I understand that these are open meetings, and the last meeting that we had, the West Seattle blog reported on, I'm not quite sure how the honor confidentiality agreement will work in this particular group. So that's just a question I'm throwing out.
Good observation, I think.
Anybody else? And we would try to respond to the
Yeah, my own feeling there is that it doesn't apply here. This is an open public meeting, and it should be transparent. I don't know what confidential issues would even be appropriate to discuss in this context.
Looks like Deb Barker.
Thank you. I just wanted to know, is there a definition of raggedy?
The way I see it is sometimes, even though we are going through technicalities and new learning process, we as community members, we don't have all the right wording compared to other levels of knowledge. So it's okay to bring every point of view is welcome. And even if you don't have the right wording, it's as a way of encouraging people to be raggedy.
Hi, everybody. This is David Bestock. I'm just curious about the decisions made by consensus. And maybe it's a little early to be asking that, but are we going to be making decisions? Are we going to be making recommendations? I don't really know the process there. So that one just raised a question mark. But I look forward to learning more about that.
Thank you. And that's exactly what we're trying to discuss, not today, but through the process, and ask, working out with you and the city, what is exactly what would make more sense more for our group? How are we making decisions? How are we moving forward? How are we absorbing all the information and getting back to community being transparent?
Hi, this is Joe Fitzgibbon. I would just emphasize or put an exclamation point around assume good intentions, because I think in any discussion that is as impactful as this one to our community, there's going to be a lot of strong feelings, and I just want to recognize that everybody who's taking the time out of their busy schedules to participate in this task force is doing it with good intentions, with an intention to serve their communities. And while we may have strong disagreements at some points, and probably lots of times where we'll have lots of broad agreement too, that I've found assuming good intentions to be a really helpful guidepost when discussing important and challenging issues.
Thank you. That's great.
This is Dan Austin over here with the Chamber and Peel and Press. I'm not sure if it fits in. I'm trying to read through all 36 to see if this fits in. But just throwing out to make sure when we're in a group this large that if we have a neighborhood, I don't say neighborhood versus neighborhood, but two conflicting opinions, that it's okay to put a pin in that and maybe move that offline instead of taking the entire conversation that direction for 20 minutes. Is that somewhere in there? Or how do we want to address kind of offline conversations we're supposed to be having this as open and transparent as possible, but not taking over a conversation or an entire meeting on one single point?
Thank you. And that's perhaps also linked to number 3 that says take space, make space, being conscious of the space that we're taking as when we are participating and acknowledging that we need to allow for other voices to be present. And I would say that is very important as a follow-up of your statement. As well as 15, no representatives don't expect a person to represent all persons of the group, making sure that we see them as a person, but also that they belong to a group of interest.
This is Marcy. I have a question. Are we supposed to use the raise hand feature in WebEx, or are we supposed to just unmute ourselves and speak?
I think that's a wonderful question. We hope to have lots of opportunity for discussion today, and I think there will be moments in time where everyone has lots of opinions. We'd love for this to be as casual and free-flowing as possible. So I think it's totally appropriate for us to just try and come off of mute and share our thoughts. If there's a moment in time where people really do have lots of comments and points at the same time, let's please use the hand-raising function. And then we will do our very best to acknowledge people who have their hand raised in the order and time in which they raised it. Wonderful question.
Okay, and I just have a brief statement for co-chairs, if I may, about accessibility.
Okay.
So first I want to say for anyone who might be listening to this later, the city has done an outstanding job of making the materials accessible to me as a blind panelist. Most all of the materials in the slides have what's called alt text, which means there's text embedded that you don't see, but I can hear on my screen reader. This is very helpful with graphs and charts. There was only one today that didn't work that way, and it was the weekly traffic flow, but I'm sure staff would be happy to explain it to anyone. And just a note to my colleagues, if any additional materials are provided, please make sure that they go through that process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to move on. I just want to flag that we have a survey, just if something really speaks out to you as we're aligning our lease agreements. So we're going to move forward from this and to the rest of our agenda. But just think of what makes more meaningful, what would make meaningful to your own participation as stakeholders and community members to make this a successful participation and process. And with that, I am going to continue with the agenda and bringing up Heather, who is going to be walking us through the state of the bridge as well as Reconnecting West Seattle.
And apologies, we'll have Matt Donahue will be the primary person to walk us through an update on the health, the physical standing of the bridge. But Heather is also available to answer questions before also heading into the discussion around traffic mitigation.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you to the co-chairs and everybody who's attending today. I appreciate your time and attention. I'm going to go through some information here pretty quickly because we have so much to get through today in limited amounts of time. Before I speak specifically to this slide, just a few bits of information to give an update on where we're at with work on the High Bridge. So as of a couple of weeks ago, our structural health instrumentation and monitoring equipment has been up and running and tied in closely with two things, the MORP and the ERP. The MORP is the Monitoring, Operation, and Response Plan, and that's an internal process at SDOT roadway structures, so that if any of the structural health instrumentation that we've installed shows a change in bridge behavior that crosses a threshold and causes an alarm, we have a system in place so that certain people, including myself, respond to those alarms, get into our website that processes that data to look at what's happening with the bridge and make a determination if we need to implement the ERP, which is the Emergency Response Plan that we developed with Seattle Police, Seattle Fire, the Coast Guard, stakeholders from the port, and Office of Emergency Management here at the City of Seattle. So that's all up in place and has been running for a couple of weeks now. What that translated to is that we had been doing near daily arm's length inspections of the bridge surfaces, in particular the worst cracked sections of the bridge, which is largely on the south girder wall of the southmost girder. And we're now rotating, because we have this instrumentation that runs all day, 24/7, 365, and reports data on 5-minute intervals. We are going down to physical arm's length inspections of the south girder wall of the bridge on a 2-week basis. So last week was our last weekly cycle, and we're not doing any of that work this week, but we'll go back up to the bridge next week to again look for propagation of cracks. And we can still confidently say that based on weekly inspections or near daily inspections to date, the bridge still does continue to show new hairline cracking every week due to its own weight and the thermal stress that acts on the bridge on a daily basis. As far as emergency maintenance repairs go, we issued drawings for construction about a little over a week and a half ago, so Friday the 6th of June. Although we had already mobilized and been doing early work with our contractor for emergency repairs, Kramer North America, for several weeks. As of this week, they are now doing active construction. It's not on the bridge, but it's near the bridge in a construction yard that they procured, where they have started to assemble these steel lifting frames that we will use to get up to the underside of the bridge to start installing carbon fiber wrap. And also of interest, perhaps to the group, is that we've begun meeting with the TAP, the Technical Advisory Panel. So we had our first meeting with them last week, second meeting this week, third meeting will be next week, and it is moving at a fast and furious pace. Lots of expertise in that group, but there's a massive amount of information to consume about the addition to this bridge and what we're thinking about for the future. To that point, the slide that should be up for your view right now shows how we're generally thinking about what to do with this bridge or about this bridge closure problem. And it can generally be split into two tracks, repair or replace. And to largely or at a high altitude describe what the TAP is here for is to help provide us with guidance in similar fashion to what this community task force is doing as we go along and make decisions to repair the bridge first with the intent of returning live load for several years and then replacing the bridge down the road, or pivoting towards a replacement track sooner and not necessarily repairing the bridge for return of live load. So if you draw your attention to this slide on the repair side, in either case, we are still doing stabilization and strengthening. Those are the emergency repairs that I just spoke about. That center or in between the two tracks, orange circle, adapt to changing circumstances if repairs no longer are a best option. That would be indicated by the behavior of the bridge as informed by our inspections and all the structural health instrumentation that we have mounted to the bridge. And if we go the stabilize, or if we go the repair route, we would put additional shoring and additional strengthening on the bridge, not just to stabilize it for safety, but also to stabilize it to return live load. And then simultaneously, we would start thinking about replacement, albeit several years down the road. As you well know from other bridge projects in the city, when you want to replace a large bridge structure, you have several years of, you can't start that too early within, say, a 20-year time frame. On the replacement side, if we decide not to spend the time and money to strengthen the bridge first, we would immediately pivot towards replacement with the intention of getting a new bridge in place, depending on how we did it, either a full replacement or a partial replacement, sometime between 2024 and 2026. And the reason on the replace side, it's a 50 to 75 year lifespan. If you reuse some of the structure, you can't necessarily assume a full 75-year lifespan. If you replace the whole thing, you design for 75 years and then try and maintain it for longer than that. And with that, I will take a pause and ask if there are any questions for me.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions on that material?
I just have one quick question because I can imagine West Seattle blog comments. Everything's being a bridge replacement or a replacement bridge. Is that strictly being looked at as a bridge, meaning across the conclusion on a possibility?
I apologize, sir. There's a ton of feedback. I didn't catch everything that you're asking.
So, just imagining the comments I'll see on the blog here. So to head those off, everything you've said was replacement bridge. Is that precluding a tunnel option, or is that, I just want to make sure that's on the table for the record, that people don't freak out that the tunnel was not mentioned in that. Is it a crossing that we're looking to replace, or is it a bridge strictly?
That is a very astute observation. I apologize for my bias. I'm a bridge engineer. that mellifluous word flows off my tongue quite frequently. But yeah, for sure. I don't think we would be remiss. We had the same consideration for the Ballard Bridge replacement study that we completed just a couple months ago, where we also looked at a tunnel option. I think we would be remiss not to explore that in some fashion here. Now, the level to which we're going to do that, it's still too early to say. That comes down to scope, schedule, and fee as we select a consultant to do the early replacement study work. And then we come down to a very specific scope of work on the funding that we have for that phase of the work and how much work we can fit into it. But at this point, we do expect to explore a tunnel as an option.
Yes.
Or I just wanted to save some work re-explaining that later when people get upset.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.
Is the plan for a tunnel or that option? Is the plan for the tunnel or that option included in one of the ways that we're discussing, like repair or replace? Does that?
So it does. And so if you look at the replacement option, that's the procurement that we have out right now for a consultant to start the early phases of replacement work. It's under that contract that we would look at the tunnel option and compare it to other types of replacement crossing.
Could you repeat the question, Matt? Because I don't think everyone heard the question.
Yeah, so the question was, I think, if I understood correctly, in reference to the slide that's up right now, wanting to know if the replacement option that's in the slide also includes considering a tunnel. And the answer is yes, it does. And so the procurement that we have out right now for the consultant to start doing this early planning work for a replacement crossing, that early phase is when we would look at a tunneling option versus other types of bridge replacement options.
Is there any specific difference in path between the shoring and design work sections for repair and replace? And if so, how do those differ?
Yeah, so one of the things we're doing with the emergency repairs is there's, generally speaking, the emergency repairs are to do carbon fiber wrapping on the exterior of the center span, and then on the ends or near ends of the tail spans. And what we're thinking now, based on the bridge behavior we've seen, is that if we need to shore for demolition or shore for more strengthening and long-term repair and return of live load to the bridge, we don't necessarily need to do the tail spans for the demolition option. And so the idea is the shoring and strengthening that you would do to return live load to the bridge would be much more robust than what you would need to handle temporary construction loads to start to demolish the bridge if we went down the replacement option.
Looks like Peter Stamberg has a question. Peter?
I do. Thanks. This is for Matt.
Yes, sir.
Being an engineer that you are, my question has to do with regard to this chart here, the unthinkable potential of a sudden, instantaneous collapse of the structure. And what early warning would there likely be, if any, with your instrumentation? And what course would that then send us on if that should occur? Because it seems to me these two options or choices here are sort of deliberative and analytical, whereas the other would be a catastrophic, change of event of condition.
Right. That's a great question. Great observation. So just to reiterate just a teeny bit, my role in all this is I'm the interim division director for roadway structures, which is the bridge department for SDOT. And although, let's say, we did repair and strengthening to return live load, or we did replacement, albeit with a tunnel or a bridge, my role in that major capital project would be as the ultimate owner of that asset once it's built. My other primary role here, though, is maintaining public safety in the right-of-way as it relates to all the structures that the city owns. And so that was behind, my recommendation to close the bridge in the first place, and then immediately turn towards standing up this instrumentation system. And so, yeah, it has the benefit of gathering data that will help inform decisions that we make for repair versus replace as we go down those paths. But primarily, it was implemented for public safety. Because I knew that we couldn't just we can't keep engineers on the bridge 24/7, 365. We needed instrumentation to do that with. So it has a dual purpose, but first and foremost, it's for public safety. And so the way that it's set up is there's 4 different types of instrumentation. So there are long-range crack gauges that go over a field of crack until anything happens on that section of the wall. There are short-range crack gauges that are orthogonal to just one specific crack. And then that same type of gauge is used to put parallel along a crack with a rotational arm so it measures crack slippage. Because that's the structural behavior that we're concerned with monitoring. and it has two different thresholds. One is a warning that basically says, hey, something's changing past a very small level, or an alarm. So if it goes to bigger change that happens more rapidly, it kind of ups the ante on how we need to respond. And what we've set up is an online meeting that's open to everybody with all the players that need to review the data, can have easy access to it. We've drilled on use of the system, so I made the team run random drills over 3 consecutive weeks so that we could get everybody familiar with getting into the system, interpreting the alarms, setting up their phones so that only alarms from those phone numbers and email addresses will go off in the middle of the night, and really, really drilling down for situational and operational awareness so that we can respond in a rapid fashion, all to get to the point to decide, do we just need to go up there and see what's happening, or do I need to call 911 and ask them to implement our emergency response plan for the West Seattle Bridge? And around that emergency response plan, we've done a ton of outreach to all the people that would be impacted by a catastrophic failure, whether we had a warning of days, weeks, or no warning at all. And they've gone door to door at this point to just make sure everybody's aware of what's going on. And then we still meet regularly with those stakeholders, including folks from the port, to discuss the status of the bridge just for their own operational and situational awareness so that they know everything that we're doing and what's going on.
Matt, I do want to acknowledge that there is perhaps 3 or 4 questions that are being asked on the chat. So because we're running a little late, out of time already, just a reminder that also for next week, we're planning to have the technical advisory panel coming to talk specifically about this. But maybe a good way to move forward would be to let the Senator Joe Wayne, also Joe McDermott, Eileen, and calling to ask the questions all at once and perhaps try to rep them for the next part. So do you want to go ahead, Joe, and ask your question?
Yeah, Mandy, I just wanted to go back to the study as well. Kind of curious to get a timeline in terms of when we believe it'll be done so that we can actually make a decision regarding repair or replace.
We're shooting for late.
Actually, Matt, let's hear from the other questions before you answer them all.
Sorry.
Eileen, could you please ask your question?
Sure. It might not really be Matt's the best one to answer, but my question is that really the only thing that the city is examining about repair versus place is whether or not the repair could be done? Are they looking at what the long-term, like short-term, long-term versus getting a replacement done so we don't go through 2 shutdowns and that type of thing? So that, I don't know whether that's you, Matt, or somebody else, but that's my question.
Great. Councilmember McDermott?
Thank you. Mine is not completely different than Eileen's. I'm terribly concerned and mentioned it in chat last time. I need to voice it today. I do not want us to be in a situation of spending any time on repair that delays any work on a permanent replacement. We know we will need to replace the bridge. A repair, but current estimates, which could change up or down, a repair would only put it back in service for a decade. We need a long-term replacement too, and I think it's imperative we're mindful of not delaying the work on the permanent replacement for 1 second, because we're also working on a temporary replacement to the existing bridge. Otherwise, we've done West Seattle a disservice.
Thank you. And last, Colleen, would you move forward with your question? Okay, well, maybe you can write it on the chat. But Matt, would you like to wrap it up?
Yeah, sure.
Addressing some of these answers?
So excellent observations and questions. I think I can answer all 3 with just a couple of quick statements. We know that we can fix the bridge. The question that we're asking is, should we, right? We would definitely be remiss to just spend a lot of time and money to repair it just because we can. And so what we're doing with WSP, our consultant partner in this, is a cost-benefit analysis. And we expect to have that wrapped up and reviewed and perhaps to this group sometime in the early fall. And that essentially is to answer the question question, not can we repair or can we replace, it's should we repair or should we replace? And all sorts of things, questions in terms of life cycle cost analysis, fatal flaws, benefits, and pros and cons of each situation will be addressed. And something that we've discussed quite a bit already is that we understand that there's a lot of time and effort and money that can detract from other priorities like a bridge replacement if we went the repair route. And that a decade is not a lot of time to invest that much money in a repair and to have to, on top of that, while maintaining a bridge that has a really significant repair on it, also have to think about and execute replacement. So those are things that are all being discussed and will be incorporated into the cost-benefit analysis. And I hope that answers all three of those questions.
Can I appreciate.
So, are we limited in what kind of traffic rerouting we can do now, or what contingency plan we have for like traffic in and out of Seattle via surface streets or whatever? Because I'm like we said earlier, like we're at 50% capacity of people moving in and out of West Seattle, but once we start phasing out of this lockdown, the traffic's going to be nightmarish. Anything been addressed in that area?
I think that we're going to get into quite a bit of information and discussions about traffic in the coming slides, so I'd ask you to...
Yeah, perfect slide.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Greg?
Until there is a permanent replacement. Councilmember Herbold, looks like you've got a yes.
Thank you so much. I just want to clarify, Matthew, you just said, as I heard it, that we know we can repair the bridge. That is a conclusion that I have not yet heard. I have heard that we are waiting for the engineering analysis to answer both questions of whether or not we can and should. And I understand that the should question is a question about a lot of really important community values. But I just want to clarify, I understood you to state a conclusion that I have not heard SDOT represent, in that it is technically possible to repair the bridge. I also want to highlight that the pathways, as I understand them, as have been presented, it does allow us to immediately start planning for a replacement bridge if we were to decide to repair it. So we do not, it is designed so that we do not lose time for the planning to do a replacement bridge, as County Councilmember McDermott said is so important.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. All excellent points. We had asked our consultant to give us some early feedback on the non-destructive evaluation, so apologize, perhaps I should have given this in my update comments. While we were doing all the structural health instrumentation, we spent quite a bit of time going through and using various forms of ground penetrating radar, pulse echo technology, and then just direct drilling and inspection to get a handle on the condition of the post-tensioning strand that's inside the concrete, because we wanted to know, was there an installation defect that would preclude us from being able to fix the bridge? And the answer is no. Now, we haven't received our official report for that yet, which is why we haven't reported it out largely or in any official capacity. But the early feedback we got from the consultant from all the data that they were gathering was that we didn't find any systemic problem with the post-tensioning strand. And so that's what leads to my statement to say, yes, we can fix it. And we have not found anything that would preclude us from doing that. Could that change over time if we start to see some fundamental or large-scale changes in the instrumentation data that we're gathering? Yes. But right now, from our NDE work, we haven't seen anything that precludes us from fixing the bridge. And on another point of interest to your comment, I think, is we started the cost-benefit analysis and the early conceptual design for repair and replacement schemes several weeks ago. And so we've been doing that in parallel. We're not really doing anything in series. We're doing several things at the same time because of the urgency behind all of the issues around this bridge closure.
Thank you, Matt. Heather's going to talk to us about the ways that we have to accommodate all of the displaced traffic from the closure of the bridge. She's going to go through a number of slides, and then we had set aside a fair amount of time for Q&A, which we've now eaten into, but we will have some time for Q&A after that. But this is a big job, and Heather's information, I think, is very important for us to focus on for the next few minutes at least. Heather?
I'll take myself off mute just for fun. Thanks, Mayor Nichols. I appreciate that. So it is a big job. I am speaking to you from the sunny Fauntleroy neighborhood of West Seattle, and so I am acutely impacted by this bridge closure as well. We reconnected West Seattle Peninsula that has similar levels of travel across the Duwamish as we had before the bridge failed is what our goal is. And it is a big goal. It is a big challenge. And we want to make sure that as we are doing that reconnection, we're doing it in an equitable way through a community-led process. And that whatever we end up with, it's going to require change from all of those who are able to make a change. Next slide, please. So this graphic here shows you that we're in a very, very different situation. The closure of the bridge has created a traffic management conundrum that isn't going to be able to be solved by some signal timing changes or some traffic circles. At the beginning of 2020, we had 21 vehicle travel lanes across the Duwamish River. The connections were just about evenly divided between the north end of the West Seattle Peninsula and the south end. Now we have 12 lanes across across the Duwamish River, and they are concentrated in the south end of the peninsula. So this means that people who live in Alki and Admiral have a much, much worse commute, and that all of those commute trips are going to have to travel through Rocks Hill, Riverview, South Delridge, Highland Park, onto South Park and Georgetown. So the graphic that you see down here with the bar that has blue and gray, those car trips in the gray have to go somewhere else, and they also have to go somehow else. So we're not going to all be able to stick in the same method of travel that we used to have. And so this is a community effort that we're going to have to go through together. Next slide, please. So this is another way to show that. The little donut graph, it's my favorite. I love these donut graphs. On the left side of your screen shows what we transportation nerds call mode split. So 82% of the people who left the peninsula did that by their cars, and 17% did it by bus, just a tiny handful by water taxi or by bike. If we keep that same mode split going into 2021 or right now, 53% of those trips are going to have to find another way. And this is a problem that we have to solve collectively, and individually each of us is going to have to take part in that solution. Next slide, please. This is really fun. So this is a list of vehicle volumes that show the location from the left to the right, the location, and then the average weekday volume now, and the baseline volume, which was pre-COVID in February of 2020, so before everybody started to stay home. So you'll see that West Marginal Way and Highland Park Way at West Marginal Way are strikingly increased volumes. And the South Park Bridge and Michigan Street at 4th have, it's a little bit more, but pretty same level of traffic as pre-COVID. As Mark H. Observed, we're not back to the normal level of traffic, but even in this still under stay home, stay healthy, we have dramatically raised levels of traffic in some very key corridors. Next slide, please. So I just want to reiterate that everyone who lives in West Seattle or in the Duwamish Valley has been impacted. But there are some real disproportionate impacts. Folks who live in the north end of the peninsula are disadvantaged today, but as time goes on, we're going to be able to add additional water taxi service to downtown. More transit service is going to be available. So there is some hope for changes. However, all the detour routes go through the south, and that means that they end up driving through Highland Park, Rocks Hill, Riverview, South Park, and Georgetown. And so we have to be very mindful that funneling all the cars down through that south end of the peninsula has real impacts on people. This is going to take collective action for us to address. Next slide, please. So I would like to note that the Duwamish Valley community is far more diverse than the rest of Seattle. In South Park, 63% of residents are people of color, and 40% speak a language other than English at home. This community of South Park, as well as Georgetown, faces a number of environmental injustices that leave people to face health, public safety, and economic disparities that the rest of the West Seattle community do not face. So their proximity to the Lower Duwamish Waterway Superfund site, higher rates of asthma and lower rates for life expectancy, as well as air pollution, significant air pollution from a disproportionate number of polluting industries, as well as the surrounding major highways, add to that. And so consequently, we need to think very carefully from an equity perspective about what it means to send that many more individual vehicles through those communities, and how that increases the racial, environmental, and social injustice that those communities are already facing. Can we move to the next slide, please? So as we ponder all of that, not just the transportation matters for our own commutes and our own getting around, but also how our brothers and sisters in other parts of the city are impacted by those choices, we need to really carefully consider all of the modes that are going to help us achieve this goal. SDOT, when you look at this list, SDOT is just one player. Other transportation agencies in the region, including King County Metro Transit, Sound Transit, Washington State Ferries, and the Port of Seattle, are also deeply involved in how we are going to solve this problem, as well as the people of West Seattle and the Duwamish Valley. No one thing, no one item on this list is going to solve the problem for us. It's something that we're going to have to address collectively. Next slide, please. So the idea is to establish, again, as I said at the beginning, establish similar levels of travel across the Duwamish to those that we saw before the closure of the West Seattle High-Rise Bridge. That's important for the whole city and for our economic recovery, but we have to do that in the context of reducing the impact of environmental injustice in the Duwamish Valley. Next slide, please. So I know that was pretty heavy, but we have a fun graphic. It's another donut. That's good. So SDOT is proposing a vision, and we would like to hear what the community thinks about this, about how to achieve those similar levels of travel and transport, but using different modes. So instead of that 82% of folks getting around in their cars, we'd like to propose that we reduce that mode split to 35%, increase the number of people who are using buses, increase the number of people who are using water transit, including the water taxi, increase the number of folks who are cycling, increase the number of folks who are both teleworking and or walking to work. All right. Next slide, please. And so in order to achieve that, we know we can't just magically wave a wand and all of a sudden everybody's taking the bus. We've all worked in transportation long enough to know that wishing does not make it so. So we are proposing a way to work through these issues together so that we can get to where we need to be. So our first step is to collect all the ideas. A comprehensive list of proposed projects from the community, from SDOT and our traffic engineers, from our partner agencies, as well as from existing transportation plans such as the Bicycle Master Plan, the Freight Master Plan, the Transit Master Plan, and others. And then we are just about done developing community proposals. So for the 4 neighborhoods that are most impacted by the detours, that would be Georgetown, South Park, Soto, and sort of that, we don't really refer to Southwest Seattle, but the southern part of the peninsula of West Seattle. We have proposals that are very neighborhood focused and are really attuned to how we can lessen the impact of the detour traffic that's going to go through those neighborhoods. In addition, we have a peninsula-wide, more holistic proposal that includes things like network connections that are going to help us achieve those more favorable mode split rates. At this point, we are just about ready to share those plans out with the community. Really want to have a community-led process here where folks decide which projects SDOT would be most beneficial for SDOT to implement on behalf of the community. We're going to go through a little bit of an iterative process to make sure that we're harmonizing all of those solutions and identifying and prioritizing projects. At that point, we'll be able to share the whole proposal with the whole community and then move on towards implementation. At this time, I imagine there are going to be a whole bunch of questions, and so at this point, I'll turn it back over to Greg and Paulina, and happy to answer whatever questions you have.
All right, the first question that I saw was from Aaron Goodman. Aaron?
Yeah, mine's more of a bit of a comment. You know, when we're talking about, and when I looked back several slides when you were talking about traffic counts, it would look from first glance that everyone's commute ends in Georgetown. And so I think it's really important to include Soto. And also from the perspective of when we look at equity of impacts, we need to not only look at where people live, but where they work. And that when you look at the neighborhoods like Soto, where we have the blue collar working jobs with a lot more diversity, that we need to look at the impacts of where people work as well as where they live.
You know, that's right, Aaron. That's a really good point. And I don't know if I just forgot to mention it, but one of those neighborhood traffic mitigation plans is for Soto. And so Soto, just like Georgetown, South Park, and the southern part of the West Seattle Peninsula, will have an individual traffic mitigation plan.
And a question here from Joe Phobel. Joe, is Joe on the panel, or is he an attendee? I think he's an attendee. And he wants to know about the... oh, shoot. he wanted to know about bike shares. Seattle had purchased the Pronto bike share assets. Could those be deployed in West Seattle?
Joe, I don't know what became of those assets. I don't know if any of my other colleagues from SDOT know the answer to that question. But I feel like we might have sold them. So let me check into that and get back to you with an answer to that.
Thank you. Marcy Carpenter. Marcy? No. Deb Barker.
Yes, I've unmuted myself. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've typed my question, but I need to ask it out loud anyway. Heather, if the bridge closure were declared an emergency from the governor's standpoint, from the mayor's standpoint, wouldn't that help enact the Reconnect West Seattle program a whole lot faster than... I wish there was more behind just SDOT doing it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Are you asking if an emergency declaration would make additional funding available?
No.
Funding and credibility and urgency.
So we are right now, Deb, working on an emergency declaration between the mayor's office and the governor's office. I will tell you, just for the sake of knowing, that in order for it to be an emergency at the federal level, somebody would have had to run into it, and that didn't happen this time. So that's not an avenue available to us, but we are working with the governor and the mayor on an emergency declaration. Thank you.
We're looking at a couple of specifics as well. One was the Skagit River, and some of the techniques that were used there to speed up the process,
right.
As well as a bridge that was built in Genoa in a couple hundred days. So we're looking at that. There are constraints that we have that perhaps those other examples don't have, but we're going to push SDOT, and SDOT's already very anxious to move this one forward. Tim McConnell had a question. Tim?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's the possibility of temporary bridge structures south of the High Bridge, north of First Avenue, a la Army Corps of Engineers type of bridges that can be used to mitigate traffic for a year or two and then be removed.
Yeah, Tim, that's a really good question, and many people have brought that up. The difficulty with, so the answer is yes, we could deploy an Army Corps of Engineer like Bailey type bridge. The problem is that the Duwamish River is a navigable waterway of the United States. And so the problem with the Bailey Bridge is we can't open it up for marine traffic. And so all of those businesses along the Duwamish that need to let their freight get out of the Duwamish waterway would be blocked by that bridge.
Did that answer your question, Tim?
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry.
Peter Steinbrook.
Oh, thank you. I got attention here. There's no hands up tab here that I can find. I want to know how and if we can get significantly more transit service through the corridor. It seems that self-evident that's going to be necessary. There is no other mode that can do the job that will be called for, at least in the short term, of the replacement and repair options.
Well, King County Metro Transit is facing the same kind of financial constraints that the rest of us are. They have the additional difficulty of needing to comply with physical distancing requirements on those buses. And so we're working very closely and every single day with King County Metro Transit to identify when and how they can increase their level of service to and through West Seattle, so that we can take advantage of that. And you'll maybe you recall that we had 30%. That was our goal, was to have 30% of folks traveling to and through West Seattle come and go by transit. 17% was the number in February.
And unfortunately, Peter, one of the constraints we have is, in the short term at least, people are going to be reluctant to use transit for health reasons, and the water taxi similarly. So as we get past 2020, that's absolutely going to be the answer. In the short term, we're facing not only this closed bridge and all the displacement, but a constraint on our ability.
Yeah, and I was certainly thinking in the longer term as well as the immediate. So I thank you, Greg. Yeah.
All right. With that, Paulina, you're going to move us into the next section, which again is followed by some Q&A.
Yes, so we're gonna thank you for all those great questions. I love the flow of who's going, all the interactions. So we're gonna move into neighborhood traffic mitigation process, and we're gonna be hearing from Danielle. I think there is a lot of absorbed today, but this is a really important subject to our communities, as Heather was mentioning. Different way of impacts, if we consider race, also environmental impacts, as well as how connectivity will be impacted. So I'm really grateful for the discussion starting today, and how the city is going to move forward in bringing back this mitigation process on traffic. Just to give you a little heads up, we have already seen, as you in the Duwamish Valley, for both increase of traffic, and we're not feeling that we are prepared at all to receive even further after COVID goes back to whatever normal life was. So let's hear from Danielle.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Well, thank you, Paulina. As Heather and Paulina both mentioned, this is a really impactful issue on multiple levels. We're looking at using a racial equity lens. We really want to prioritize these areas that are being disproportionately impacted by the detour route. So as we mentioned, Highland Park, Rock Hill, South Delridge, and Riverview, South Park, Georgetown, and Soto. And community members are already talking about increased traffic, speeding, pedestrian safety, pollution, and as we've noted multiple times in this meeting, it's just going to get worse as the traffic increases and people go back to work. And these communities are already highly impacted by increased levels of pollution and asthma and the like. So it is really important that we're looking at what we can do to help mitigate the impacts of the closure and the detour. So the plan is that SDOT currently has lists of projects for each neighborhood of projects that will cost less than $100,000 and under 12 months to build. And these are really traffic improvements to help with, traffic, speeding, things such as that. And they're things that can be done quickly and be implemented to help people in those neighborhoods. And in partnership with you all at the task force, we really need the communities that are most impacted to be telling us what they need. Because things have changed so dramatically in the past few months, we really want to make sure that we're in line and doing projects that are going to be the most impactful. Next slide, please. So just going through quickly an overview of what the neighborhood prioritization process is going to look like. As I mentioned, we're developing those project lists. They come from different community suggestions in the past and projects that are already possibly in the queue for later on. We have been conferring with community experts on approach. I've talked to a lot of you on this task force and others in the community. We are currently creating accessible materials, and we're translating the materials into all relevant languages. Then, once the lists are released to the community, we're going to be asking community members to fill paper and online surveys and prioritize 10 or so of the projects they think would be most impactful. We are working with community groups to help publicize the surveys, and Department of Neighborhoods, which I work for, has a program with community liaisons who work. They're directly from the communities, and they work with non-English speaking communities to help get their input. Then after the process, SDOT and the task force, you all will review the information and create a plan depending on funding and other considerations. And SDOT will present the plan back to the community to get final input, and then agree on action steps and timelines. Next slide. And so we really, this is intended that the community will lead this process with support from the city. We want the community to lead, but we don't want to overburden with asking too much, so we are helping. We are currently reaching out to groups that have not been traditionally part of this conversation. We're working with trusted community advocates to reach community members. We really have a commitment to make sure people who are not affiliated with organized groups still have a way to provide input. SDOT and the city will be transparent about limitations, expectations, and criteria as much as they can, and make every attempt to honor the neighborhood's feedback and suggestions. Next slide. So we can answer any questions.
Okay, so looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat that we would like to address. One is from Mary Corrigan. If you would be able to speak on how would this address transportation for children, high school to schools to West Seattle, and can you speak of allowances being planned for these children?
So, Mary, thank you for your question. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Low Bridge at the end of this presentation, and that's a policy issue that the task force will take up at our next meeting.
From John Houlihan, would you like to ask your question now? Okay, I'll read it. What is the plan for freight mobility and potential impact on the port and local businesses? And I would ask the other one from Denny. Is King County Metro prepared to require passengers use masks and open windows to maximize ventilation? That's another question for King County Metro. Heather, Danielle, would you like to address some of these?
Heather, do you want to answer?
So is King County Metro Transit going to require the use of masks and open windows? You know, I got to be honest, I haven't been out of my house for a really long time, and I'm not 100% sure what Metro's requirements are. It's my understanding that they are preferring people use masks, but I don't know what their ongoing policy is going to be.
I can answer to that since I am also part of a equity cabinet there, and King County does require mask and social distancing seating. But we're currently trying to look into what's happening with those buses that are already crowded, like the number 60, for instance, that serve the Duwamish Valley has been seen as like a lot of use of, because many of our community members are on the service, service needs, so it's a crowded already issue. Deb has a hand up, so I would like to call her for a question.
Thanks, Danielle. I appreciate all the efforts that have gone into laying this out. My concern is timing, and is there any way to shorten this timing, because the impacts to these communities are already happening? If it's a double check back, it seems that it's going to take a lot of time before anything gets done. Is there any way to shorten the timeline? the double review or something. Thank you.
Yeah, we're trying to go as quickly as we can, and I know that it's hard when you're trying to do things in an equitable way to make sure that you're taking the time and doing it right, and at the same time knowing that this is so important to get things going, to make real changes on the ground. So I think, I think that's something that I'd love advice from the task force on as we go through the process. If there are ways we can speed up and balance that equity with the timing, it's a conversation worth continuing.
Thank you. I would like to call Greg Ramirez. He has the hands up. And then also, Heather, there is an unanswered question about the freight. The freight mobility. So go ahead, Greg, first.
Yep. Hey, everybody. This is Greg Ramirez, Director of the Georgetown Community Council Board of Directors. So just a quick comment and then I guess a question. One, to Danielle, she attended our community meeting on Monday, and we're starting this process of engagement around this prioritization process. So we look forward to engaging our community around that. It's very important to us to be able to identify ways to mitigate these traffic impacts. So I think just want to call that out and say we're eager to do that, and thank you for starting that process with us, and Heather as well. And then number two, I guess the one thing that I think I mentioned in one of the previous meetings that we had is, when we look at the detour route, that the official detour route, Michigan Street is not technically on there, but obviously it has become a part of it, and obviously that's heading right through Georgetown. And so understanding, obviously when we're talking about mitigation, do we have a way to for wayfinding to be able to show, to make people know that that's not necessarily part of the detour, right? If we can do a better job of that, it's just something I wanted to flag because again, it's naturally become part of the detour, even though it's not officially part of the detour. So that's just something I wanted to throw out. Thank you.
Thank you. Paulina, I think Daniel.
Actually, I was going to ask Heather if she could answer the prior question on the freight mobility and potential impact on port and local businesses, and then we move to Marcy Carpenter.
Okay, so yes, we're going to, you may recall that I talked about individual neighborhood plans. We also have network connectivity plans for both freight and bicycles. And so freight has its own list of projects that we are considering. We presented those to the Seattle Freight Advisory Board, and we will also share them with our freight and maritime town hall that we hold once a month. And of course, make all of those plans available to you, the task force, as we move forward.
Marcy, would you like to continue? Marcy Carpenter?
Sorry, my question was answered. Thanks.
Okay, so let's see if I have answered all your requests. There's a question here. What are the trouble? Well, no, I'm sorry. Why are there double review if this issue is so important? An example.
Already asked it.
You covered that one. Okay. Is there any other question? We have still a couple of more minutes that specifically. Okay, so Daniel?
I'm wondering, is there a way that we can get kind of these raw ideas out faster that have already been submitted by neighborhood groups, so that we can not be doubling and tripling effort on the exact same ideas? So we can share some of the information that's going around via email or some sort of lightly rolled up list.
Yeah, Daniel, we can absolutely do that. Michael Harold can advise me on timing, but we have we started out with gigantic lists of all the ideas, and we've narrowed them down to things that we can do within a year, because that is that's the time that we have to make these changes. If it were up to me, which it isn't always, we could send those things out to you right away. Michael, can you advise when we're going to be ready to release those neighborhood and network connectivity plans?
Absolutely. So, Daniel, wonderful question. The list, as Heather mentioned, is a reflection of probably close to 35 sort of town hall style meetings, commission meetings that we've had to date that reflect the types of improvements and things that people have asked for. And the only sort of thumb in the scale that SDOT has placed on those lists are, as Heather mentioned, the things that can be done in rapid fashion, and 100,000 or less, with acknowledging that there are some very real budget constraints that the city is facing at the moment. And so we want to roll those out as quickly as possible. We just did not want to do that without having a chance for the co-chairs and all of the task force members to engage in that sort of 30,000 foot view approach. And it's sounding like, an important piece for us in the conclusion of this conversation is acknowledging sort of where we feel like there is coalescence, and that seems to be one of them on this approach for these specific neighborhood mitigation plans.
Well, I know a lot of us, myself, the chamber, but other neighborhood groups like Deb with Mocha, other people are volunteering their time to look into these efforts. So if we could kind of see what's out there so that we don't have someone go down spending their time working on something that's already been worked on, I think would be really efficient in moving it forward faster. So that's my only concern and feedback. So I'd love to see that list when we can.
This is great. Thank you, Danielle. I want to acknowledge a question by Ali from South Park. When is SDOT going to provide pedestrian safety measures in South Park and Georgetown, including speed bumps and speed limits through the streets, given that it's already impacting a lot of traffic? Also, there is another question from Sylvia. What is the timing on finalizing new options of transportation? Examples, water taxi increase, allowing shuttles to take the lower bridge, etc. And I think Councilmember McDermott had the hand raised. Do you want to ask your question as we're finalizing on this?
No question now.
No question now.
Much earlier, no question now.
Okay.
Okay, so let's answer those questions, and then we have to move it on to wrapping it up on next steps.
Okay, so Allie, that's a good question. I think you'll find that those ideas are wrapped up in the neighborhood traffic mitigation plan that we are going to present to each of those neighborhoods shortly. What we're going to ask of the community is that they prioritize those. Okay, I see that we have a member who's really interested in when. I agree with you, Sylvia. Michael, do we have a timeline when we are going to get those plans out to the community?
Daniel can speak to that too, but I think for task force members, if people want to see the list, we can certainly do that. We want to make sure, however, that the crux has been how do we make sure everyone has a chance to engage, and that's really difficult in a digital environment. So we're close to having all that digital infrastructure in place.
Yeah, hopefully in the next few weeks we'll be ready to go.
Okay, and you all have my commitment that I completely agree that is too long, and we will see what we can do to shorten that up. I think we can send those out to the task force more quickly than that. Woof. What were the other questions?
I think you answered them both. Thank you, Heather.
Oh, and let me just, I'm sorry, Paulina. One of the things that I wanted to say is, yes, we are looking at additional water taxis. Yes, we are looking at additional shuttles. Those services are provided by King County Metro Transit, and King County Metro Transit is facing the exact same financial upheaval that the rest of us are, and so we're working very carefully to make sure that we're making those investments at the right time and in the right place.
Thank you, Heather. And today is the beginning of the conversation. I know there's a lot of more questions and reactions. Unfortunately, we have 1 minute left. So what I encourage you to do is really to fill out that reflection form, to ask questions. You want to represent different stakeholders, to check in with community. We are meeting next week, and we're going to have to have to start with, which we couldn't cover today, which will be the next low bridge access policy. So we're gonna have to delay that for that conversation next week, as well as look forward to hearing from you. What else do you think we should be representing in these communities, as well as bringing more of our attention to the co-chairs of if there is something that we could include in the agenda. Greg?
Yes, I want to add my thanks for your great attention, thoughtful comments and questions. We've got a lot that we're capturing on the chat line and the Q&A, and we will be working to respond to all of those questions as well. I know we're all interested in the low bridge and what potential that is going to play in reconnecting West Seattle. So that will be the beginning of next week's meeting. It is going to start at noon, not at 1, but at noon, in order to accommodate the two city council members' schedules. They have emergency budget conversations starting at 2. So noon next Wednesday, we'll continue this when we'll get that much deeper into it. If you've got anything between now and then, please let SDOT staff or Paulina and I know, so that we can make sure that it gets addressed either before the next meeting or during the next meeting. Thank you all very much.